Welcome to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Every week, I'll be sitting down with a sales executive where they'll share their stories and experiences that produce game-changing results. Let's be honest, sales can be a tough game. I'm sure at some point, we've all delivered a less than stellar demo, been ghosted by a client or two, and sometimes maybe we did more talking than listening. And that's where I can help. The stories and insights our guests share can be applied to your own business, your territory, or with your team, so you're not reinventing the wheel. Our weekly tactics and strategies help you get out of your head and start creating your own path towards game-changing results. Welcome back to the K2 Sales Podcast. I'm your host, Karen Kelly. Now, a lot of people are coming to me now, both friends and actually colleagues, and some of them, unfortunately, have been laid off just due to the contraction in the economic environment. But there's a lot of people who are going through transitional phases, and they're looking to either change companies or change roles within their company, and they're wondering what to do. And so I had the pleasure of speaking with one of LinkedIn's top voices, Amy Volas, also the founder and CEO of Avenue Talent Partners. So she is well versed in this area. But really, the conversation was about if we're experiencing this transitionary phase and we were getting the itch to move. But what we have to be mindful is, what are we running away from versus what are we running towards? And if we are not clear as to our purpose, our why, what fuels us, what lights us up, then we're going to find ourselves most likely in the same position in 6 months from now. And so we talked about how can we just quiet our mind, look inward, and really understand what's happening with us. You know, replay these situations where you did something very well, or perhaps where you let somebody down, and replay it. Go back to the moment, look at descriptors, and acknowledge that that was you, but acknowledge also that the lesson learned. And you had a choice to be in that story. What role did you play? Why did you make that choice? And just get really clear, and you start putting the puzzle pieces together as to how you make a decision, where you're attracted to, why you're attracted to these things. Because in the absence of that, we're going to find ourselves in the exact same roles, and we're going to be just on this revolving merry-go-round all the time. And unfortunately, when that happens, think of the downstream effect we have on our team, right? So our team is looking to us to model the behavior. So if we don't know who we are, if we're looking for extrinsic motivation, we're following the almighty dollar, we're not crystal clear of who we are, what lights us up. We're not connected to ourselves emotionally, the energy we're putting off. We're inviting our team to do the exact same. And when you think about, what their expectations are, they're expected to drive results, right? Improve revenue. And how can they do that with their prospects when they don't know who they are, and they don't connect with their audience, and they're not disarming because they're looking at the leader and that's the behavior they're modeling. The expectation is it's okay to play on the surface. It's okay to use this jargon terminology and not break it apart to really understand what this does mean. I'm not setting clear expectations. Therefore, you don't have to set them in your meetings either. So it all starts at the top, and you are modeling the behavior. And so if you're going to do that and you're going to do it well, you need to have clarity as to what makes you happy, what lights you up, what are you good at, what are those superpowers, how can you recognize them in others and help them perhaps see it in themselves. So we went on so many tangents here, and I think it's a really timely topic based on what's going on. And for those people who are perhaps reluctant to lean in and get quiet because, they might be afraid of what they're going to find out, we talk about just baby steps and just leaning through the discomfort, because it will be uncomfortable initially, but it takes time. But over time, you realize it's not as bad as you thought, but the joy and the clarity on the other side is so much worth it. It's worth it. It's the journey we're going through. So if you know anybody that's in a new leadership position or that's been in there, 10 plus years, encourage you to send them and forward this to them, because Amy shares so many suggestions as to what you can be doing and what you should be looking for to just really quiet yourself and get clarity as to what's actually going on in there. And that's powerful when we know that, and there's confidence that comes out of that, because there's this sense of belief and conviction that I am certain that this is what I like, that this is what I want, because I've done the work. So definitely encourage you to take a listen, share it with anyone you feel would benefit. And where we find Amy is on LinkedIn. She's a huge voice there, very valuable, and we'll link all the other areas and initiatives she's part of. So hope you enjoy it as much as I do. And thanks for listening. Okay, with all the movement in the sales environment, there's a lot of layoffs, obviously, with the downturn in the environment, from a financial standpoint. But there's also a lot of people who are looking to change, and it's funny because I'm actually getting friends and clients calling me, and they're saying, Karen, I'm either looking to change jobs in or change positions in my current company, or I'm looking elsewhere. So I feel like we're in a transitionary period. And the one thing that I caution them is to just be mindful of what you're running away from, because if we're not really certain of our why or the purpose or what we're trying to align ourselves to, then chances are, 6 months down the road, even if we change, we're really going to find ourselves in that same position. So, my question to you, Amy, is, how important is it for leaders, especially, to really have a sense of their purpose or their why?
I think it's table stakes. The very first thing that I ask people is what's important to you and why. And it's amazing to me, Karen, that people have, it's almost like that deer in headlights moment where it hasn't been considered fully. Or I get very surface level answers where it's culture is important to me. Having a seat at the table is important to me. Product market fit is important to me. And it's like, well, why? And what
Hmm.
does that look like? And how do you describe that? And it's like, uh, and that's interesting to me because if you don't know why that's truly important to you, or you can't describe it, or you know that it's important, but you're not really sure where it's all coming from, how on earth can you spot it in terms of what you're going to? So I agree with what you just said. If we replay the tape a little bit, you said, when I'm talking to my friends, I don't want them just running to something because they're running away from something. If you're going to go to something, in my opinion, it needs to be equal. That's just like the very bare minimum or greater than. And you go for greater than. But the only way to know what greater than is to really get clear on what am I doing today? What does that look like? What have I done in the past? So we've all done things. Some of the things that we've done are really marvelous. Some of the things that we've done aren't so marvelous. And in that, between those two statements, there are lots of lessons learned. There's a whole lot of clarity to be gained. And I find our experience is the great equalizer of having answers for ourselves. And I think it's human nature to want to go external and say, "Well, Karen, what do you see? Tell me what I should do." And it's
Hmm.
like, when that happens to me, I'm not you. I don't know. I don't know what it feels like in your skin, in your bones, in the day to day seat that you sit in of leadership, of what you like, what you don't like, your triggers, your wants, your hopes, your fears. I'm just a person on the outside looking in that sees a few things, but those few things are just part of the story. They're not the full story. And so, that purpose to your original question, in my opinion, that's the foundation. So, how can you build a house if you don't have the foundation in place? And you certainly can build something, but the minute that there's a storm or there's anything that's going to happen and the wind blows, it's going to crumble. And I don't want to go through that. I've been through that before. It sucks. It's not fun to go through. So, to your short question, my long drawn out answer, yep, it matters. It matters a whole lot.
Hmm. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Just what you said when you started about, product market fit. And it sounds like they're sharing jargon, and they're telling you what you think they think you want to hear, especially being, in the recruitment space. And so it just that makes me think of what kind of leader am I getting? Am I getting that robotic leader that's just going to be, like a task master and I'll follow whatever, and not truly that free thinker that's vulnerable enough to look inward and say, why am I feeling this, or why is this important to me? And I think those that are comfortable enough in their skin and willing to go there are the ones that are going to see the growth in themselves and their team, but also embrace the good and the bad. And the bad's not bad. It's just to dig deeper and go like, why did I do that? What was I thinking at the time? And look how far I've grown from it. So just that looking inward and that reflective, I think that's missed when you're getting these robots that are memorizing all these things. And then again, from a, that's what you're showing, that's what you're modeling for your team. Be a robot, memorize.
Well, and the last time I checked, and you correct me if I'm wrong, we're all human. The bots have not taken over. I am not robotic. I make mistakes. We make mistakes. You make mistakes. The person down the street makes mistakes. The person that we report to makes mistakes. We're not infallible, right? And in the mistakes, that's where I learn the most, right? Because especially if I've royally screwed up, and I have, everybody has. It's in that moment where it's like, I don't like this feeling. This does not feel good to me. I don't want to repeat this. So, what did I learn so I don't do it again? And the only way to do that is it's not you telling me, Karen. It's me telling me. It's me sitting with myself and understanding. And sometimes you can't do it in the moment because you're just too close to it.
Mhm.
It's taking that rear view and sitting with it and describing it. So, a lot of the work that I do with folks, whether it's um, with Avenue Talent Partners in the executive search that we do with our clients, or it's a call on Thursday night sales, or it's what I'm doing with Better Together, or it's whatever it is to really stop and think, go to that moment. I think visualization is a very powerful thing to do. So let's go to that moment. And yes, it's hard. So we're going to open up the wound and we're going to pour a little bit of salt in it. And that's hard to do, but that's okay. It's going to be helpful. Let's go to that point where you made the mistake, where it was hard, where somebody disappointed you, where you disappointed the person, where you made the mistake. What did you do? Describe it to me. What did it feel like? How did it look? What happened? All of those things, those are descriptors. Those mean something, they carry weight. And when you're going through that, I find that in the moment and even shortly thereafter, we're not even getting giving credit for that. We just want to get through it as fast as possible because human nature is I don't want to be hurt. I don't want it to feel icky. I want to get through it. Especially in this day and age, it's like I don't want this. I want to get through it as quickly as possible. And I want everything to be rainbows and roses and unicorns and easy. And here's the thing about life and our careers and leadership. It's not easy, it's hard. So going back in time and thinking about that and really flirting with that concept of what happened, what went down, how do I describe it, what was my role in it? Because in every story that we're involved in, we're involved. We have culpability, we have responsibility, we have a role in the story. Even if it happened to us, we still have a part of that story. If it happened to us, we decided to be there or we were brought into it and we stayed. These are all choices. What did we learn from that? If you could do it all over again, what would you do differently? These are all descriptors so that when you're hearing yourself talk about it, then, and I'm a big journaler and not the typing kind, I write it out because automatically you have to write it out. It's intentional. And I'm huge on intentionality. So you're writing it out and you're thinking about it. So now I'm thinking about it. Now I'm listening to myself. And then when I start seeing patterns and themes, I have the ability to get real clear on what did I learn? What is important to me? So that when you're talking to somebody like me, and I can see it night and day, right? So when I'm talking to someone and they say, I've been there, I've done that, I don't want to do it again because of X, I know that they did that work. Versus when somebody's like, what do you mean what's important to me? For the job? And I'm like, no, 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 I'm not talking about what I'm working on. We haven't even talked about that. You don't even know what that is. I'm talking about you. If you look in the rearview mirror, what does that look like? And they're like I have 8,000 heads. There's such a big difference between that, Karen.
Mhm, mhm, when you were just painting that picture, I can see it too. But, you said so much stuff there, and I just think those descriptors and when you're replaying and you're going back to that moment in time and seeing yourself, I think that first point or commitment is to acknowledge it and just say, "Yeah, like I did that." Otherwise, I think we remain in denial and there's no moving forward or growth in denial. But then when you said, you feel the weight of it. And I think what I feel when you said that is that if we can go through that, and it's going to be uncomfortable. I think if you're starting for the first time, it's definitely going to be uncomfortable. You have to get vulnerable. But the more you can lean into it, tap into it, understand why you made those choices, because they were choices, that you can start releasing that weight and realizing your own capability, going, I went in here, it's hard. I didn't like what I saw, but going through the work and the emotions, oh my God, I'm feeling my shoulders get lighter. And I think that invites you to start automating that process and start just really getting clear and looking inward to go, okay, here, and just start going. As soon as something happens, okay, go through a framework. What happened? What was my role in this? What triggered me? And kind of go back and isolate and pinpoint. It's not I'm a bad person. I made a bad choice that day, or I could have made it better. But why? So we can get in front of them. That's what it sounds like to me.
I I think it's all of the above, and I just think it's clarity.
Hmm.
And when we're clear, everything and everyone else around us is clear. When we're confused, how on earth do we expect ourselves to not only make good decisions for ourselves, but that we can come across clearly to anyone else that's trying to understand us? So think about the interview process, right? Which was the whole impetus of this discussion is if you're going to go, you better go for something good, right? It better help you get better. How many times am I going to use better in that, that answer? But it needs to matter. You're elevating. I hope. I hope you're not regressing. I hope you're progressing. That's the whole point of making decisions. These are career decisions. These aren't job moves. There's a big difference between the two of those. So when you're doing that, in my opinion, the only way to do that is to do this of what we're talking about. Otherwise, you're on autopilot.
Hmm.
If you're on autopilot, you're in the back seat of your career and somebody else is driving it for you. And those tend to be the folks that come to me and are like, I'm the second runner up and I can't get the job. I'm passed over for the promotion. It's like all of the like, womp, 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 womp. And it's like the work that really needs to be done to get that clarity hasn't been there. So when I'm asking questions, crisp, clear questions, I can't get a crisp, clear understanding. And it's not that the person's bad, they're not. It's
Hmm.
just that they haven't done that work yet. And so, in my opinion, clarity is the great equalizer of helping to confirm or deny of what you're considering, if it makes sense or it doesn't make sense. Because here's the thing about interviews, they're exactly like your biggest sales meeting. The best, biggest sales meetings come together to mutually confirm or deny whether it makes sense to join forces or not, just like an interview does. And so that's really what it is. It's about having a business conversation. And if all of a sudden you ask me a question to say, Amy, what's important to you? And now I'm talking about all sorts of things that don't matter or make sense. And I'm talking around it because I haven't thought about it. I haven't considered it. I don't want to sound dumb or whatever the case may be. I sound confusing. And by the way, Karen, this is the number one reason why candidates don't get invited back in the interview process is they're not clear and crisp.
Hmm. Yeah, that's huge. Oh, I wrote so many things down there. But think about, just to build off that, candidates and their role. Clarity and communication, I always say, is in the response of the your audience. If they're not doing something, it's not that they didn't hear you, you weren't clear. And so they usually say clear thinking is clear speaking. But how often do we actually think about how our message is going to be received or perceived by our audience when we haven't fully considered it ourselves? And so I just think when you just compare that interview to the sales process and people are really unsure what's important to them or how they haven't done the inner work, it's all about, for me, people buy an emotion or they hire on emotion, that connection, that authenticity, even picking up on someone's energy. So when you have clarity of what's important to you, what your why is, just going back to that, there's a connection. They're like, wow, that's in line with us as a company, as the culture we're trying to bring in. And there's beacons going off because at that top level, that's what you're going to start attracting when you start hiring your team.
Well, I say this all the time, like attracts like.
Mm-hmm.
I believe you're talking about energy. You mentioned it, and all of a sudden, all of my Reiki little
Mm-hmm.
tentacles went up. I'm like, oh, yes. I believe in the law of attraction.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you're putting out is kind of what you're getting back. So if all of a sudden I'm not clear, I don't know what my purpose is. And by the way, it's not like you have to be a walking Simon Sinek billboard. It's okay if you're murky on some of the details. But if you don't understand fundamentally why you're there to do what you're there to do, you're going to attract that back to you in the way of a role. So let's go for example purposes. I deal with startups, software startups, and they use me to help them hire VPs of sales and CS. I'm very clear in that, right?
Mhm.
Well, if all of a sudden I was like, well, I just work with SaaS companies to hire sales leaders or revenue leaders, what does that mean? And do you know how much I would get in turn that would be really confusing? And then all of a sudden I'd be like, sure, I can help you. And then I'm spinning my wheels on the wrong clients, holding their business back, holding my business back. And ultimately, I'm not making money and neither are they. And oh, by the way, I'm attracting the wrong candidates and I'm attracting the wrong clients. See how this works?
Mhm.
So it's the same thing for a, let's call it a sales leader going through the motions and they're like, I just am a good people leader. What? What does that mean? What does that
Yeah.
mean? Or I want to go for culture.
Mhm.
What? Or I'm a good software sales leader. What kind of software? What does that mean to you? Because here's the thing about it, right? When it comes to sales leadership, there are many different shades of gray. Are we talking about inbound? Are we talking about outbound? Are we talking about enterprise? Are we talking about channel? Are we talking about later stage? Are we talking about early stage? Are you a builder? Are you a maintainer? What are you? And by the way, those are just a few little examples. There are many, many more. So that's the thing. It's like, if I have an exercise that I go through and I think about superpowers of people, if you were to ask me, Amy, what's one of your superpowers? As a sales leader, deal manager all day long. You know why? I love being where the action is. I love understanding what happens on the front lines with a company, with a buyer, with a customer. Why do they buy? What are those themes? What are those patterns? What drives them? And how do we respond to meet them where they are and putting that together to break down a deal of not only why we'd win it, but why we'd lose it? You didn't ask me that question. Watch how I just rattled that
Mhm.
off
Yeah.
and clear all get out. You didn't even ask me that, Karen. I just came up with it on the
Mhm.
fly because I know myself. So when you know yourself, now look, for anybody that wants me to be um, heavy, heavy, heavy focused on being a company manager, which is a very different kind of leader. And it's not that I don't care about that, it's just not my number one superpower. I'm not going to attract that person that wants that as the front facing superpower. See how that works?
Mhm.
And that's okay.
Mhm.
I'm not for everybody, and that's okay. And I think that's the thing that we really need to normalize. So everyone talks about normalizing things. Let's normalize this thing. You're not for everybody, and everybody isn't for you. And that is a okay.
Mhm.
That's called what the process is for. And that's
Yeah.
all right. As long as you're not a jerk, that's okay. There's nothing the matter with that. That's where clarity is your friend so that you can get to understanding that sooner than later so that you're not just going through the motions and being like, well, I'm just shopping an offer. And then you've wasted your time and everybody else's time. And then you get an offer and you're like, this is absolutely not what I want. And it's an emotional thing now.
Mhm.
And now bridges are burned. Why do that? You don't have to.
Yeah, and even when I read your value prop, it was very granular and crispy, like, and I think it just show you just cut through everything, so there's no confusion, there's no clarity, and I think when you said you're not for everybody, which I love that line, but it's basically says you're true to yourself. But how can you be true to yourself when you don't know who you are and even your superpowers, so that you know how can I align these with the areas of opportunity of my team? And if I don't know that, like, how effective of a leader am I going to be? Versus my weaknesses or my opportunities, where can I start? Who can I surround myself with to start improving them? Again, that awareness. And I just see there's people, and I know years ago, I was in corporate in the 90s, but And I hated the word fluff. They're like, "Oh, we're going to talk about fluff here," and just the what was the word they would say? Just the softy stuff. And I'm like, emotions and vulnerability. And now we're at least moving on that we're talking about it, but just these are the things people are looking for, the silver bullet of what makes a great leader. Well, a great leader is somebody who actually knows themselves what makes them great and is able to articulate it and is able to see it in other people and bring it out in other people. And so I think there's nothing fluffy about it. It's being able to quiet your mind, calm yourself down, and truly look inward and see what's contributing both to your successes and your failures, and control them. So I think weak about that is pure strength, I think.
I would agree. And I too grew up working in the 90s where it was like there was no place for that talk, right?
Yeah.
And by the way, if I were to replay this tape, if podcasts existed then, which they did not, but if they existed then, I think that they would be so riddled with jargon and case studies and, all the things that we don't do today. And my, oh my, how the times have changed. I wouldn't be talking like this then.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I'm mentioning that is we are humans and we do evolve.
Mm-hmm.
And as time goes on, you get more clear. It's called the wisdom of experience and age. And it's okay if you don't have all of the answers. What's not okay, in my opinion, is when you put your head in the sand and you expect everybody else to figure it out for you. Because here's what I do know for a fact: if you do that, and even if you try to listen to everybody else, you're now on everybody else's agenda, not your own. And that starts becoming empty. And that's not very fulfilling. And it is like a boomerang. So even if that head is in the sand, at some point it's going to come back, and it's going to come back harder and a lot more difficult than if you just did it in the first place. And it is hard. And I'm not trying to make it sound like, well, you just get out your journal and you just do a little bit of deep thoughts and you just sit there and you put on some meditative music. No, I mean, look, I have coaches, I do Reiki, I have a therapist. These are things that I've worked on for years and years and years. And while it easily rolls off my tongue today, the reason why it does is because I've done the work and I'm trying to pay some of that forward to be helpful to those that are trying to make heads or tails out of where they are. And I see it often in the work that I do where people are really in earnest struggling and
Mm-hmm.
grappling with big decisions or career crossroads or what's next, or should I say stay or should I go? And when people ask me, well, what's typical or what should I do? It's like my answer is I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I can help you get there, but I don't know. Ultimately, you've got to make this decision for yourself. And here are some things to think about.
Mm-hmm.
But there is no playbook for any one of us. The playbook is ourselves.
Yeah. It's funny because the two messages I sent yesterday were just that. I said, quiet, sit quietly. And I said, look inward, but not only about today, in the next 5 years from now, and see where this aligns. And I said, I said, only you can answer this. So all those things, but I just think it's like, I prioritize this as well, and I've done it my whole life. And I take trips to Sedona, and I have healers, and I do all this stuff. But it's because it's my true north star. And so when I recognize it in people, I see such a different type of leadership. I see someone who's confident, but who has this level of self belief that is off the charts. And it's not in an arrogant way. It's just I am so in touch with myself that I'm okay to say, I don't know what the answer is. Let me think about that. Or what do you guys think? Versus this, well, I think we're going to do this. And you're like, where's that even coming from? And so I think when someone has the puppet or the hand up their back, it kind of goes back to what you said in the 90s, that case study persona. Well, for me, you're hiding behind something and you're not willing to do the work, because it is work and it's ongoing. But all I'll say is on the other side is growth, if you're willing, and joy if you're willing to go through it.
It's like, so now I know why you invited me to do this podcast.
It's taken a different turn.
No, I'm like, you mentioned the word energy and I grabbed right onto it. I was like,
Yeah.
"Ah," and you're like, "Okay." And I'm like, "Oh, Sedona's and Crystal." Okay, so anyway, that's a different podcast for a different day. But it was it was once described to me like this, and I think it's a really powerful visual for anybody listening. Imagine a hallway, and so it's going to look like this, right? Here's a door, and here's another door. And in between, you've got a hallway. And this door is open, and you're standing at this door and you're looking through it. And this door here, you can see it, it's open, and you can see all this beauty and all these wonderful things. And you want to get there, but to get there through the hallway, there are monsters and there are icky things coming at you, and you just have to walk through it. And it's scary. And it's step by step by step. And then when you get to this point, it just takes one step. You realize that the things in the middle, they're not as scary as you thought,
Mhm.
right? And it's really hard to take that first step through that doorway, to go through that hallway to get to this. And it's a really good way to think about doing some of the work that we're talking about, because we make it sound so easy, like just get clarity with self. Just go do that. How about you just go do that? And then it's like, but wait a second, if these things are rooted in how we were raised and how we were taught to communicate, or maybe we weren't taught to communicate, or maybe we were taught that, we're not worthy, or that our emotions are bad, or we don't know how to check our emotions. Because here's the thing about emotions and feelings, we all have them. They're not wrong, they're not right. It's what we do with them that matters. So if you're learning some of these things, and it's okay, you can learn it if you're in your 40s, in your 30s, in your 20s, in your 50s, wherever you might be in your life. It's, are you willing to or not, realizing that it's not just going to come to you in 1 second.
Yeah, I think Amy, what I'm hearing and what I would agree with is it's a journey. It's for me, it's been a lifelong journey. And I think if you're going to enter it, like you said, you have to be willing to go through the discomfort, lean into it, be vulnerable. And these are all things that, and this isn't for leader, this is for life, because who you are as a leader is who you are in life. And it's going to make you a better friend, a better parent, a better partner, whatever it is. But because you have clarity of self. And there's nothing more freeing and liberating than that. Just knowing what's contributing, and like, what, how do you like your eggs? I know with 100% certainty I like my eggs, over easy or scrambled, and just it's freedom. But I just, we can move off this in a moment because I could talk about this forever. But I would just invite people to take that first step. And for me, been journaling my whole life, and I actually go back and reread them, because what I'm looking for is patterns and trends, and seeing, if I'm still talking about the same thing, well, there's something going on there that I'm not moving forward. But also, I have to write 3 things I'm grateful for in the last 24 hours, and really to, again, tap that gratitude. And what it does is it trains the brain to look for the small things. And then again, you can turn that, past that forward, as to how can I do something for my team, for my partners, that is completely about them. It's selfless. And again, like attracts like. So I'm breeding that. For me, is helping to build and sustain a positive culture in the workplace, but also around me in life. Well, thank you for going down that avenue with me, because I do love that, and I think it's huge. It's paramount. People are always looking for the silver bullet. It's like, you are the silver bullet. Just start from the inside, working out. I want to transition a little bit, and everything we're talking about plays, because we're building the fundamentals of ourselves. So everything, it translates to everything we're going to talk about. But I want to talk a little bit about the importance of coaching as a leader. And I have a stat here that 74% of leading companies cite sales coaching and mentoring as the most important role of the sales leader. And my question to you, Amy, is, working with people in the startups, and even clarity, how clear are they of that expectation going into that role? Is it that they're clear and then they perhaps choose not to do it? Or is there a little bit of smoke and mirrors there, where people are like, oh, I didn't really know this is part of the role?
I think it's another catch-all statement of um, assumption. So I think one of our biggest issues that we have, especially in the hiring process, is big statements are made. So I want you to forecast. I want you to coach. I want you to be a people leader. I want you to hire. I want you to lead from the front. I want you to, these are all things that people talk about, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what's missing is the context of, well, what does that mean to you? How? And so coaching, I find, means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Some people think it means I'm going to buy a piece of software like Gong or Chorus, and that's coaching. No, it's not. No, that is not. That is absolutely not. That's called lazy leadership, and that's not coaching at all. That's called technology helping you listen and understand for some things, but that is absolutely not coaching. It's what you do with it in your one-on-one, in your discussion that leads to coaching. But that absolutely is not coaching in my book, in my definition, in my opinion. So I think I live by this motto. It is up to us in the hiring process as leaders, as founders, as CEOs, as whatever, even as reps, setting the stage early and often together for expectations is key. If we don't do that, then we are relying upon assumptions. So I find that most people, when it comes to hiring, they're like, oh, I got to hire. Ugh, that's such a pain in the neck. I don't want to write a job description. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to do a little Google. I'm going to do a little LinkedIn. Maybe I'll do a little Indeed for good measure. And oh, wait, I'm going to look at my competitor. They're hiring a VP of sales too. That job description looks really cool. It's from our domain, it's our competitor. I'm just going to change our logo, swap a few words, and call it good. And now you have no understanding what the role actually is for you, for your business, the work that's required. And you could go side by side with your biggest competitor and you, and I promise you, the work is going to be different. So and people look at me like I've got 12 heads. It's like, no, 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 no. Your buyer journey, maybe your biggest competitor, maybe they've tackled enterprise really, really well. And that job then is very, very different because of that. And you don't want to do enterprise. You tried to do it and you botched it up, and you're really good at SMB. They're still your competitor. They still do what you do. You just are in different segments and you've
Mhm.
mastered different things well. Well, wait a second here. Oh, and they have an SMB function, but they're not really good in that, and that's why they're your competitor. You're winning against them. So their description, if it's written for an enterprise sales leader and you're looking for an SMB sales leader, those two things are not congruent. So I'm all about intentionality of what does this mean to you, to your business, to the work that's required to be successful in the role. And then when you've nailed that and you're clear, so clarity is going to be our theme of the day. And then when you're clear on that, that's when then you can infuse that into your discussions in the interview process of, well, now what does that mean to the person? And not about the behavioral based questions about, tell me about a time when you had to coach somebody and it didn't go well. I can Google what are the best questions that I'm going to get asked in an interview for a tech company. And that's probably going to come up, right? As a sales leader. Instead, I want to talk about what you've actually done, how you've actually done it. I want to get as close to the work as possible to see your true competency, to get beyond the shiny object statements of, well, I came from this company, it's in your competitive landscape. We exited. I've had two exits underneath me, and my team has grown 500%. Well, you've been part of that. I don't know anything about your role. You could have inherited it from somebody else that built it for you. I don't know. So,
Mhm.
this is why that context piece is so key when it comes to getting clear on, for example, coaching. What does that actually mean? How do you actually coach? What's your methodology? What's your philosophy? How does that look in practice? What does your tech stack look to support that? And if somebody's like, I use Gone and call it a day, that's going to tell me a lot of what I need to know.
Yeah, and it's also, Amy, incumbent upon the person who's interviewing to really break that apart because those are all blanket statements, right? And so if they're not asking, if they're not leaning into their curiosity and say, "Walk me through what that looks like," then they're going to get these high level. I mean, that's basically where you're inviting, just big words into the environment, and it's like, well, what does this mean? Well, I understood it as this. Well, that's not what it was. So I think if you don't break it apart at that entry level phase, that introductory phase, that's what you're going to get. You're going to get vagueness, and again, that's going to continue to breed. So imagine that that person's hired and then they're looking to hire their sales team, And they're the people that are saying, you know what, we can have you start off as an AE and in a manager role in 6 to 9 months. And their expectations are out the wazoo. Or we can double your territory, or you can expect commissions like that. And so they're luring people in under false pretense because that's what they were taught. So I think, like you said, like attracts like. Well, mediocrity also attracts mediocrity.
Well, and and by the way, good begets good and bad begets bad. And what I mean by that is if you've just taken a shoot from the hip, call it good with this job description from this place over here, and you're just showing up for the big blanket statements, the magic, in my opinion, is always below the surface. And that's the thing. I mean, quite frankly, and shameless plug time, that's a huge part of why my clients work with me at Avenue Talent Partners is because we are practitioners. We have done the job. I do understand these things and I can dig below the surface when I'm having a discussion with somebody where they're like, well, yeah, I doubled the size of my team. How'd you do it? What team? How was your team structured? And they're like, "What? Nobody's asked me that before." Are you
Hmm.
kidding me? Like, what do you mean nobody's asked you that before? Like, in my opinion, that's table stakes. That's like the very tip of the spear. So it's those things where it's like, how does it all go together? So I think of it like this, think about COVID. The puzzle industry exploded. You're at your dining table, you've got all the pieces of the puzzle out and you're putting it together. And at first it's really overwhelming where it's like this, all these people, do I start with the border? Do I like, what do I do? And then as you start putting it together, it starts to become a lot more clear. This is the same exact thing that we're talking about. You've got all the pieces and I've got to put together the picture. And maybe I like that picture and maybe I don't. Maybe that picture is good for what I'm trying to hire for. And maybe it's not. But the only way that you can confirm or deny that is the stuff that we're talking about.
Hmm. And I just think the connection you get with that person when they do go beneath the surface. But think about the questions because you're digging deep and they haven't been asked those before. You're preparing them because that's kind of that practice round, right? So when they do go there, if the person who's interviewing them is astute enough and asks them that, they've already got a round of practice with you. And hopefully, might not be enough, but it really does invite them to think about, the real reason. And is this line to me as a person, to, my superpowers, or am I just looking at the dollar amount?
Well, and that's the shiniest object of them all.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many people went just for the dollars. And by the way, I've done it too. And the time that I went just for the money, it was the biggest mistake of my career because I ignored all the other things. And guess what? All the other things, they didn't align. And money, no amount of money can fix your day to day of what's broken. No amount of money can do that.
Hmm. And I think, it's your happiness, that's your insight. And I think that's why, going back to what we just killed a few minutes ago, is if you don't know your why, you're chasing that money all the time and you're continually getting let down because you're looking for external sources to provide intrinsic happiness, and it's not going to happen. And you're just going to be in this perpetual cycle of, oh, the grass is always greener.
Indeed.
One thing I want to just tap on before we start wrapping up here is you mentioned journaling. If people are looking to, maybe journaling's not for them, but is there any other idea you have about how, because I do believe in the writing it down, there's a bit of an accountability piece, and also they can start seeing what's in front of them. They can acknowledge it, label it, as long as they're not attaching any limiting beliefs to it. But what else can we do if journaling is perhaps not for us? Is there anything else you can think about to just really get our thoughts kind of on paper?
I I don't know of anything. Well, actually I do. If you are not a journaler, and I am a huge journaler, and I know you are as well, given this conversation. There's something about voice notes. So I don't know anybody that doesn't have their phone attached to them
Hmm.
or some sort of device close by. If you don't want to write it down, as you're trying to make heads or tails out of something, have a conversation with yourself and get it down. And then listen to yourself. And then look for the common themes in that. So that's an alternative.
Yeah, I think that's great. I actually heard there's a woman and she does her affirmations on her phone and then she plays them 3 times throughout the day. So there's that repetition throughout the day. And, before you know it, she's shifted her mindset and it's her own voice. There's something powerful but it being your own voice as well. So I think that's a great alternative. Thank you. So for people, Amy, who are aware now of, okay, I got to really understand my why, what fuels me, because it has such an impact, to attracting the right company, being true to myself, but also the team, that I'm going to attract and retain. Is there two or three things you would recommend they start doing, immediately to really start preparing them for having these conversations with potential companies?
I think first and foremost, you want to be very careful about who you surround yourself with. So choose wisely.
Hmm.
And when you're talking about what you're considering, have like a panel of your own board of advisors or your own advisory group or whatever you want to say of no more than 3 to 5 people. Because if you have too many, then you're going to spin yourself out and you'll have too many opinions and you won't know what to do with them. And you want to diversify the group, right? So you don't want it to just be your friends or just be your family or just be colleagues at your peer level because you're going to hear the same things and then you're just looking to hear what you want to hear. So that's one thing. The other thing is use a scorecard, get really, really clear on what your criteria is and the weight that each one of those things carries for yourself. And then the third thing is use that journal, listen to yourself, especially through the interview process. I find that so many people they have happy ears and they look for or they listen to or they seek out kind of like in the sales process, happy ears of like, oh, you didn't give me an objection, so it means you want to buy something from me. And it's like, no, that's not what that means. So I think when you're doing that through the process of listening to yourself, you're really starting to understand when I'm at my best, this is what it looks like. And when it's not going well, this is what it looks like. And you can really do work around that to continue to put your best foot forward and to work on the things that are working against you.
Hmm.
So those
Those
are
are
some things
amazing.
I would do.
Those are amazing. And think about if you don't know what makes you your best, like what are you striving for? You don't know. It's like a goal that's vague. The universe doesn't respond to that. Well, you have to be very crystal clear, like you and your value prop. You cut through. There's no questions. You're bang on there. So anyone listening, I think that's great. Your circle of your sphere of influence is huge, and I would agree 3 to 5. And I would also agree have a diverse group because otherwise you're just Britney Spears surrounded by yes people telling them what you want to hear. How are you growing? How are you being challenged? And I think I have one friend and she's always like, well, why do you think that is? And she makes me think too much that sometimes I doubt myself when I already did a lot of work. But I think you need those people because it really does force you to be 100% certainty. This is what I want. I've thought about all angles and there's conviction there that, you know what? I'm not turning back. I think we need that.
Agreed. 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 I've loved this conversation. Thank you. I
Yeah,
hope
my pleasure.
anybody listening.
Yeah, well, I think it gives them a lot to think about. And I think especially leaders who are kind of taking that mindset of dictatorship or even leading with fear, it's like there's no room for that anymore. And it's getting in touch with yourself and really leaning into that. And as we talked about, it's going to be uncomfortable initially, but the clarity, everything on the other side is completely an upside for everybody, and it really just gives you a more, I think, fulfilling life. So I'm drinking the Kool Aid.
Same, same.
Now, Amy, you have your hand in so many things. Obviously, Avenue Talent Partners, co founder of Thursday Night Sales, most recently, founder of Better Together with Amy Volas. So, just to build off that, where's the best way for them to reach out to you, to get in touch with you if they're interested in any of the initiatives you're part of?
I hang out on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Amy Volas that's there. So that's where all of these things are, and they're easy to find, but it's also where I am. So LinkedIn, avenuetalentpartners.com, Twitter, um, just do a Google search on Amy Volas and you'll be able to find me.
Yeah. And your posts are amazing. I have to say there's such a balance of authenticity, but a level of conviction of just like there's experience there. It's like I'm true to myself and there's a little undertone of I don't really care if you agree with me either because I've done it long enough that I know what I'm saying. So I just love what you post. I think it's just great.
Thank you. Well, it's like what we were talking about, and thank you, that means a lot to me. It's kinda like, I've been around back to the '90s too, so it's been a while, and I've learned a thing or 2. I've messed up more than a thing or 2. I've mastered a thing or
Mhm.
2, and I'm in the same book as a lot of people, just in a different chapter, and I see how the story plays, and I wanna help them get out of their own way.
I love that. I love that. And I'm sure the coaches you have are in that same book. They may be one or two chapters ahead of you in some instances, but that's the benefit of being at various stages because some you're looking forward and are in that learning phase, and some you're looking in the rear view and you're in that helping phase. And I think both of them make us a more, a richer person.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Amy. I really enjoy this. I learn a lot as always from you, and keep that voice of yours loud because it's making a difference.
You're welcome, and thank you for having me, and appreciate the feedback, and I sure hope it is. So, thank you. And to anybody
My,
that's listening, thank you for hearing us out. This was a good conversation. I appreciate it.
yeah, me too. Thank you so much, Amy. We'll see you
You're
all
welcome.
next time.